We'll turn it over to Ms. Addison.
Good morning. Before I share my story, I just want to let y'all know that when I speak in front of people, for some reason, I almost always get choked up and teary-eyed. So regardless of what I'm talking about, so there's a good chance I might cry, but I'm fine. This is just how I react and I can't really control it. So I just thought I'd let y'all know. So I'm supposed to be talking about trusting God, but I'm going to talk about a time when I lost my trust in God for a while and the lessons it taught me and how I never want to go back to that point in my life again. A lot of you might not know this, but my sophomore year, so 2 years ago, since I'm a senior now, I was really struggling mentally and began to become kind of isolated and distance myself from my problems. But that also meant that I distanced myself from the people in my life. A big problem was that I was not taking care of myself. I didn't really have a sleep schedule and went to bed most nights at around 4 a.m. So I rarely got more than 5 hours of sleep, and it was not uncommon for me to pull an all-nighter most of the time. So that was not very good, obviously. I often didn't have an appetite and didn't eat breakfast and would skip lunch at school to do homework because I was always so behind. It had something due that day that I hadn't finished yet. It wasn't that I didn't want to eat or a self-image issue. It was just that I had this constant stomach ache from stress to the point where thinking about eating would sometimes make me nauseous. So I just wouldn't do it. Doing basic hygiene for me was super difficult. And every day I would wear the same exact outfit, which was jeans, the same baggy sweatshirt, Converse, and a ponytail, because subconsciously, if I dressed the same every day, I could go unnoticed and not feel anxious about being judged for dressing weird. But because of this, I just lived in a constant state of not feeling bad about how I looked, but never feeling good, which just kind of felt numb, which was kind of worse than feeling bad. Sorry, I lost my spot. In terms of school and grades, I didn't have a 504 at that point to accommodate for my learning disabilities, even though we had applied to the school for it. But since they had to pay for a 504, they didn't want to give it to us because they said we had too high of grades to grant it. And so school was a major stressor for me. So that was the first year that I got a C in a class. And in every class, I would constantly calculate how high I need to get on an assignment to bring my average up to where I needed it to be, or how low I could possibly get on a test or a quiz to still have a B in the class as an attempt to have a short-lived confidence boost. Spoiler alert, it never gave me confidence. It just made me more stressed. I was having trouble concentrating. I failed multiple tests that year, and I always had a stack of late work, which was super stressful, and I just kind of felt like a failure most of the time. Needless to say, I lost almost all motivation for school, and I desperately wanted a break. Sorry. But my school has a finals exemptions policy where in order to exempt a class's final, you have to have a certain amount of absences, or you can't have a certain amount of absences. So one absence, you need an 85 or above. 2 absences is a 90 and 3 is a 95. So I never missed school. I never got a break. I didn't know it at the time, but I have generalized anxiety and persistent depression disorder. So being at school was really hard for me socially and mentally. And sorry, okay. And by the time I would get home every day, I was so drained, I would just take a nap instead of doing homework, which just made it infinitely worse. Doing simple tasks was overwhelming, and I was just kind of on the edge of a mental breakdown the entire year. lastly, one of the hardest things about that year was I didn't really have any friends. Okay, sorry. Okay. I had Melody, which many of you know is a very close friend of mine, but I didn't have any classes with her. And we stopped talking, not because we didn't like each other, because we didn't want to be friends, but just because we had our own problems. We were so overwhelmed and we didn't have time. My only other quote unquote friends that I had at that point were the orchestra group. I had known them since middle school, and I wanted so desperately to be a part of their group. There were people in the group that I was so close to, but apparently not close enough to be invited to hang out with them ever. I would see on social media all the time videos of them hanging out together, and I would just sit there and cry because I wanted so much to be accepted by them. Sorry. But they never noticed me. You know, Audrey would go so far as to throw parties just to be included, but they would act friendly and then forget about it the next week. And y'all might be asking yourself, but Addison, did you have Audrey to hang out with at school? Well, the problem was that at the time, me and Audrey had a very love-hate relationship, emphasis on the hate. we were constantly fighting and were so unhappy with our own lives that we would take our anger out on each other. I took over Miranda's room as a part of isolation. And we only really talked when we did homework together, which would usually end in a fight because we'd become really frustrated. I was so overwhelmed and frustrated and angry at the world that I started blaming God for my problems. I stopped wanting to go to church and saw it as a waste of time because all I could think was, my life is so miserable. How could God possibly be looking out for me? I stopped trusting him and desperately and despised him for letting me be so unhappy. So then quarantine hit and I didn't have social obligations. I had so much less schoolwork. And for the first time in a year, I felt like I could finally breathe again. Okay, so this is where it gets into the good part. Randy Cassandra came home, which was amazing. And there were so many nights we would sit on Miranda's bed or in the back room of the trailer and talk for hours. Weirdly enough, one of the things that really pulled me out of the bad cycle I was in was Just Dance 2. At the very beginning of quarantine, my family started having Just Dance paddles. And even though I never won and I came in dead last by a lot, I had so much fun and it gave me something to look forward to, which I hadn't had in a really long time. We started traveling and saw breathtaking places and amazing views, and I saw God in nature. And we got our cat Luna, who would and still does cuddle with me almost every night, which is more healing than I can possibly describe. I completely dropped the orchestra group, reconnected with Melody, and found some other friends, which has helped a lot. for me and Audrey, we had one time we did a thing for theater, and because of it, the two of us alone had to quarantine in the trailer for 3 weeks together. I remember one Saturday where we didn't get out of bed and we watched Avatar 2, The Last Airbender the entire day. And I think it was almost 2 seasons worth of it. So it was really fun. Those 3 weeks brought us closer together than ever. And I hope Audrey's in agreement. But we love each other very much. And I can't imagine my life without her. And she's the closest relationship I have ever had. Other things that have improved is that I got a 504. I now have a sleep schedule. I go to bed at 12 o'clock almost every night, which gives me a full 8 hours, which for a high school student is kind of insane. My grades are higher than I ever thought they would be. I give myself breaks and have become 10 times more confident in myself. I don't lose my appetite anymore. I have been going to therapy for over a year, which has really helped with my anxiety and persistent depressive disorder. And overall, I'm happier and healthier than I've ever been. I know this was a bit of an information dump, but I wanted to tell y'all about it because in hindsight, I should have trusted God. And my first mistake was believing he was never there for me, because he was. From Just Dance to Cribbage Night to Finding My Confidence. He was there for me the whole time, but I chose not to see him. I see him now and understand that the blessings God brings are immeasurable. And even if you are in a dark time, he stands beside all of us. Everyone has difficulties. It's part of being human, but our faith in God is what sustains us. Thank you. Okay, hi guys. I also want to start this. Oh, right, thank you. I also want to start this by saying, if I tear up or get choky, I promise I'm fine. Also, it's just what I do. So I want to talk about one specific summer. It was the summer between my 8th grade and freshman year. And that was by far the hardest summer of my life. And I kind of hope it stays that way because I do not want to go through anything like that again. But for starters, it was the summer between middle school and high school. So I already knew things were going to be changing. I just didn't expect them to change as much as they did. I had 2 major events happen very close to each other. And both of them were kind of out of nowhere. I didn't see them coming at all. The first was that someone very, very close to me, that's my age, attempted to end their life. This was, now luckily they were not successful. They are here today. They're doing great. They're totally fine. But it was really shocking for me because I didn't even know they had depression and they didn't know either. So it really came out of left field for everyone. So I was actually, Aaliyah was having a sleepover at her house when my parents got a call that this person was in the hospital. So they went to the hospital to look after her. But when they told us the next day, I don't think I said a single thing until we got to the hospital. I completely shut down, dissociated, and just couldn't process anything that was going on because it truly felt like I was in a bad dream and just needed to wake up. I thought maybe when they first said that she was in the hospital, I thought it has to be like an accident or a crash or something. But when they said it was suicide attempt, I would have not thought in a million years that's why we were going to the hospital. I feel like in that moment, I really turned into a teenager and left my innocent young childhood behind because I then from that moment on had to deal with a lot harder and darker topics on a regular basis. As Alana shared in the scripture today, it said that it does not fear when heat comes, its leaves are always green. In that moment, I was a tree in the heat, and I'll be honest, my leaves did not feel green. I was sad and angry and scared, and I felt God very little at the time, and I started to feel resentment towards him. That was my first mistake. After a while, like my dad would say, I like to use this phrase, I adjusted to my new normal. I was taking things day by day rather than hour by hour, and things were going okay. And once I finally got into this state of okay, I got another curveball. My grandma got a knee replacement surgery, which she really did need, but the surgery went great, and then she went home, and 2 days later, she fell on it. She fell on her knee, and the best way that we can describe it is her knee exploded. It was really, really bad. So we took a spontaneous and unplanned trip down to the valley to look after my grandma. And I thought a few-minute ride to the hospital was awful earlier in the summer. This was a 5-hour ride of not knowing if my grandma was even alive still. All we knew was she was in surgery, and a very, very long surgery. It was really terrifying. At that point, I felt like a tree that had been burnt to a crisp, and I did not think I would ever feel green. It was really hard thing to go through. And yet through all of it, I just had this gut feeling that it was going to turn out okay. And I would like to think that that was me subconsciously trusting in God, but I can't surely state that that's what it was. I don't really know. It could have been me just being naive or in denial, but I never actually thought she was going to die or that her leg might have to be amputated. I just had this feeling that it was going to all turn out okay. In the end, everything other than the initial fall, obviously, ended up pretty much in the best case scenario. And I would like to think that a couple crazy miracles happened too. For example, the night she fell, she forgot to take her blood thinning medication, which she takes for blood clots every day and never forgets. And if she had taken it, she might have bled out. She also never felt any pain when her knee exploded, but it wasn't that she had lost pain physically. It was, she could feel the tourniquet tied around her leg. That was painful. And she complained about her toe being stuck under a door while her leg was bleeding out. So she had feeling through her leg, just not where it should have hurt. She never got an infection in her wound, which doctors were worried about. Her leg never had to be amputated, and she never got a blood clot when they took her off her medicine. These could be seen as a ton of crazy coincidences, but I choose to see them as the Lord looking out for Grandma and our entire family. While we were down there, the Los Fresnos church family was amazing. They did a ton of kind acts just to lift our moods, support us and Grandma. And they brought flowers to the hospital visits, sending texts and calling us. It was truly uplifting. For the while we were there, the only places we were was the hospital during the day and Grandma and Grandpa's house at night. So going to the church service was a breath of fresh air that I needed. I will never forget that church service because that week was a testimony service. And I got up and talked about everything that was currently going on in my life. It was the first time I'd really talked about it. And while it was terrifying and a bit embarrassing because I was fully crying in front of everyone, it was extremely healing for me emotionally and spiritually. I had bottled it up for so many months, and actually verbalizing what I was feeling was therapeutic. And actually going to God about these experiences that had altered my life for the first time helped me mend a bond with him at a time when I was really at its most broken. It's not always easy to trust God, but going through the process of rebuilding that trust showed me how important it really is. And it's an active decision that takes work. That same day, me and my dad drove home, and for 5 hours, and for the full 5 hours, we just talked and talked about everything that was going on. I talked about things I hadn't told anyone and had realizations that have stuck with me my entire life and will continue to do so. I like to think of it as my first ever therapy session, just with my dad instead of a therapist and in a red Mini Cooper rather than on a couch. All the turmoil that had been built up was finally brought to the surface, and saying it out loud made me understand my emotions and lack of trust better, which was the start of my healing process. I'm obviously leaving for college in a few months, and while I'm terrified of a lot of things, like having to move for the first time in my entire life and for somewhere so far away as Iowa, having to make a ton of new friends, I know I'll be okay. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. And I know for a fact it's not going to be perfect. Nothing ever is, but it's going to be what it needed. And it's going to be what it needs to be. Everything has worked out so far, or I wouldn't be where I am today. And it's not going to be perfect, but as I said, it's going to be what it needs to be at the time. And I trust God that everything will continue to work out, not perfectly, but how it's supposed to be. And because of that trust, I'm a tree with green leaves for the first time in my life.
It takes courage to share.